So, some of you are probably wondering, Ottomans? When did they explore anything? Or possibly even, who are the Ottomans?
The Ottomans were a Turkish empire based on Islamic principles. It lasted from 1299 to 1923, and at one point the empire stretched from Eastern Europe all the way to Yemen. The reason it's so important in history is because it was one of the longest reigning empires in the world, and without it things like sextants, modern mathematics, and even the modern state of Turkey might not exist. The Ottomans actually fought in the First World War as a member of the Central Powers, but that's a story for another day.
What many people don't know is, like the Portuguese and Spanish, the Ottomans also did a lot of exploring.
But Rob, the Ottomans weren't in America.
Well, yeah, they didn't have to. You see, the reason Europeans even found the Americas was by accident. They weren't looking for it. For years, the Christian nations of Europe had been prevented from having a direct link to the East Indies by the various Islamic nations of the Middle East. Up until 1258, it had been the Abbasids who pretty much stopped communication between East and West in the Middle East. This prevented them from importing things like spices, which were highly regarded in European society.
Most European food at this time was pretty bland, so spices helped to make stuff taste way better.
In order to get around this, the European nations either had to trade through the Ottomans, which was expensive and un-Christian, or find another path to the East Indies. The Venetians are most well known for doing the former, creating a controversial trade network with Istanbul. However, other nations such as Portugal and Spain looked for other ways to get around this.
That's great, Rob, but how does it link to the video?
Yeah, I'm getting to that. So anyway, while the Ottomans didn't go looking for another route to India, they did have to do a lot of exploring before they got there. At this point in time, the Ottoman state didn't control what is modern-day Iraq and Kuwait, so the Persian Gulf wasn't open to them. There was, however, one place that the Sultan had had his eye on for a while: Egypt and the Red Sea. However, these territories were controlled by some guys called the Mamluks. They were a kind of successor to the Abbasid Empire, and they had ruled Egypt for a very long time. These guys were all like, hey, we control the path to Mecca, which essentially made them the protectors of the Islamic faith, as people going on the Hajj, a pilgrimage, had to enter their country. Let me tell you, the Ottomans were none too pleased about this, not to mention the Mamluk control of the spice trade. So the Turkish Sultan, Selim the Grim, or Selim the Navigator, I don't know, whatever you want to call him, went to war with the Mamluks.
So the Ottomans pretty much wiped the floor with the Mamluks, who were already in a large naval conflict with the Portuguese, who by this time had already reached India.
In fact, Mamluk Sultan, Tumen Bey II, had actually accepted the conditions of supremacy that Sultan Selim had set out for him. These were pretty much printing Selim on his coins and saying public prayers in his name. However, the Mamluk emirs were none too keen on this, and had the Ottoman messengers executed, enraging Sultan Selim and making absolute conquest the Turkish goal.
One of Sultan Selim's big achievements of this was to become the protector of Mecca, so essentially the head of Islamic faith, considering that he now controlled the route of the Hajj. Another very important outcome of this conquest was the control of the Red Sea, which the Ottomans had now gained. If you controlled the arsenal at Suez, then you could pretty much have a fleet in the sea 24/7. The trouble is, the Ottomans didn't actually know a lot about India, about as much as the Portuguese did, and possibly less. In fact, if you look at some of the early maps, they really had no idea at all. A lot of it is the same sort of giant continents and small seas and stuff. That is until Piri Reis entered the fray. Ahmed Muhadeen Piri Reis, Reis means captain, was an admiral and explorer of the Ottoman Empire. Around this time he had compiled a map of the known world for the Sultan Selim. And when I mean map of the known world, I really mean it. Like, this thing had Asia, Africa, the Americas, and possibly Antarctica, which for the 1500s is pretty freaking amazing. Now, Piri Reis didn't actually go to every single one of these places, but rather he compiled the map from his own knowledge as well as other maps such as the Mappe Mundi, which made it possibly even more accurate than if he had just guessed. Some of the only other maps we have in comparison to this map are Western ones, showing that the Ottomans had just as much a place in the age of exploration as the Spanish and the Portuguese. Upon Sultan Selim's arrival in Egypt after its conquest, Piri Reis met him in Cairo and presented him with the map he had produced. What's interesting about this map is that we only have a fragment of it left, the bit depicting mostly the Americas. This tells us that Selim ripped the map into pieces so that he could keep an important part of it on him, the Indian part. The New World part of this map, although interesting to us, would have been quite irrelevant to the Ottomans, so the Indian Ocean part of the map was taken from it to be used personally by Selim. For the Ottomans, entering the Indian Ocean was a huge deal, one that they had really no experience in. You've got to remember that the Sultan's court was all the way in Istanbul, a very long way away from the Red Sea, let alone the Indian Ocean. Not to mention the fact that they had rivals in the Mughal Empire and Safavid Persia. It was after Selim died and his son, the famous Suleiman the Magnificent, took power, did things in the Indian Ocean really start to take off. Arguably, it wasn't actually Suleiman who did this, rather his Grand Vizier, a kind of Prime Minister, Ibrahim Pasha. Ibrahim had been Suleiman's friend since childhood. Captured as a slave from Parga, Greece, when he was young, Ibrahim was taken to the Nicaea Palace in western Turkey. He was given to Suleiman as a present and the two became fast friends. Ibrahim was also educated by the Ottoman court, which certainly would have helped with his future career. Upon his ascension to the throne, Suleiman made Ibrahim Grand Vizier and Governor of Egypt. These moves put an interest in the Indian Ocean trade into Ibrahim's mind and also facilitated the growth of the Indian Ocean faction, a group of people who wanted the Ottomans to expand into the Indian Ocean rather than focus on Europe. Ibrahim Pasha and this Indian Ocean faction were some of the first people to toy with the idea of an Ottoman Empire that expanded into India.
The ways that Ibrahim Pasha began the exploration of the Indian Ocean are interesting and complex. He started by reforming much of the administration within Egypt. The new governor abolished the old Mamluk import and export quotas and instituted the traditional 10% tax that was taken on all goods. This made the market more favourable to private merchants as well as encouraging many traders from India to come to Egypt, increasing their knowledge of the region. Ibrahim Pasha is also known for bringing the old explorer Salman Reis back into employment. Salman Reis originally had been working for the Mamluks prior to the Ottoman invasion of Egypt. He had been sent on one of the last Mamluk expeditions to the Indian Ocean and therefore had a good knowledge of the area. Ibrahim sent him out on a new expedition to gather a report of the Indian Ocean for the new Ottoman regime. His report outlined the key regions of the Indian Ocean, valuable resources, and how easily the Ottomans could take and hold areas of it. This gave the Ottoman Empire a vast amount of knowledge on what they were dealing with. It also put them on a level where they could consider competing against the Portuguese. A key part of Ibrahim Pasha's government is his expedition to Yemen. You see, Yemen was essentially a part of the gateway to the Red Sea, which allowed spices to get to Suez and into the Ottoman market. However, the Portuguese had been blockading this for a long time, which stopped many merchants from getting to Egypt. If the Ottomans took this vital region, they could stop the Portuguese blockade and securely get spice from India. Ibrahim was pretty convinced by this, and ordered the old derelict Mamluk fleet in Jeddah to be taken to Suez and repaired. He made Salman Reis the admiral and formed a force with Hayreddin al-Rubi at its head. After that, he instated Hadim Suleiman, another ex-slave, as the governor of Egypt before heading up to Istanbul. The invasion of Yemen went well, and soon most of the region was under Ottoman control, all except the walled city of Aden, which refused to surrender to Salman Reis, but did agree to saying prayers in Suleiman's name and printing him on their coins. This imperial takeover had a dramatic effect on the Portuguese. Admiral Lopo Vaz de Sampaio didn't send the usual Portuguese fleet to blockade the Red Sea, but instead stayed in Goa, either out of fear or calculation of whether the Ottomans would advance out. But this wasn't the only thing that Yemen changed. Many of the Islamic nations of the Indian Ocean saw this new rising power in their region and appealed to it for help against the Portuguese. Almost immediately, the leaders of Hormuz and Calicut approached the Ottomans asking for assistance against the Europeans. Not to mention the corsair, Mamel of Cananor, had found a new possible trade route that bypassed the Portuguese. Things were looking up for the Ottomans. Their investments in exploration seemed to have paid off, and they were quickly becoming a main competitor to the Portuguese. But things would soon change, dramatically, as they always did. We hope you've enjoyed this video.
This topic has so much to it, but we weren't able to fit in everything. Maybe we'll explore more of it later. That is, if you guys want us to.
Most of the information in this video came from a book called The Ottoman Age of Exploration by Giancarlo Gasselli. We aren't sponsored by the publishers or anything. I wish. But I would definitely recommend reading this book if you want to find out some more about the Ottomans in the Indian Ocean.
Thanks for watching. Remember to rate, comment and subscribe.